Hi, I wanted to take a few unscripted moments to talk to you about why I am emphasizing the practical techniques of memory in this course. Well, one of the obvious reasons is I want you to truly internalize in a useful way much of the content of this course. And one of the best ways to do that is to have locked away in your memory banks the 20 centuries of church history in a way that you can work your way through in useful, practical ministry situations. You'll be shocked how many times you have an opportunity to give an illustration or example from church history, and it'll be very helpful for you to be able to say, oh yeah, so-and-so 8th century, or this 9th century. And the way you'll do that is because of the emphasis on memory that I'm insisting upon in this course. Just to give you a little bit of background on that, let me give you a personal story from one of the IBS courses that I took back in the day. The professor, I thought, had many weaknesses, and one of them was his exam strategy. He handed out a 5-page exam, single-spaced, legal paper, and it consisted of about 190 things that we had to know in order to pass the exam. In other words, the exam would be based on those 190 things. Well, you really didn't even have to show up for class, but of course we all did. But the emphasis was learning those 190 things, and then you'll be fine. But it was a long list, and it wasn't easy, and some of them were multi-parts. So a friend of mine wasn't particularly concerned about it, and I asked him what he was going to do. He said, well, I'm just going to memorize it. Well, yeah, that sounds nice, but how do you do that? He said, well, I read this book, and this book taught me how to memorize, and so I'm just going to do it. He showed me what he was doing, and I was so excited about the principles, so I went over to the university bookstore, this is at Fort Collins, and bought a book called The Memory Book by Harry Lorraine and Jerry Lucas. It was one in a long string of books about how to memorize, but it's been one of the most successful of the 20th century. One of the great things about the memory book is that it put in a very simple format, basic ways that you can memorize long, complicated things. It could be long numbers, it could be key ideas, it could be a chain of events, it could be about anything. Well, my friend and I spent a few hours memorizing that exam. We both got perfect scores, and from that point on, memory was a major hobby of mine. Well, a few years passed, and I found myself in my Hebrew course at the International School of Theology. Now, my professor in those days had just finished his PhD at Dallas, and he was a very gung-ho professor, very strong on content. And one of the ways he showed that was by having many and hard assignments. For example, he passed the word that on the first day of class, everyone would be expected to show up having the Hebrew alphabet memorized. Well, that was tailor-made for me because I memorized the Hebrew alphabet using a linking system. So Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Daleth, all were connected to symbols in my mind. Aleph made me think of an olive, like a cocktail olive with a red pimento inside. Bait made me think of a fish hook, and so I hooked the two together by putting the olive on the fish hook. Gimel made me think of a camel, and so I thought of a camel taking the hook that was baited with an olive and getting hooked on it. And so in this way, I worked my way through the whole Hebrew alphabet. I wasn't joking when I commented that based on my system, I could recite it backwards as easily as I could forward, because I could go from camel to fish hook to olive just as easily as I could go from olive to fish hook to camel. Of course, they thought I was joking, but I wasn't. So by memorizing things, you spend much less time if you do it in a way that has been worked out over the centuries by people who really know what they were talking about. When it came time to begin to study for the final exam for that course, a friend of mine named Ken, who was also interested in memory, and I decided to work together. We approached it this way. We decided to make for ourselves a a study guide that would really be the hardest conceivable exam that our professor could ever possibly ask. We wrote it out on pieces of blank paper. It was about 20 pages by the time we finished it. And then we went back and we looked up and filled in answers and then proceeded to memorize everything that we'd come up with. Well, somehow word of this got back to the academic dean. And Dr. Ted Martin sent word that both of us were to report to his office because he needed to speak to us right away. When we got there, he said, "What's this I hear about you having a copy of the Hebrew exam?" Well, it seems that some of our classmates had heard that we were studying an exam and had turned us in. Well, we said, no, we don't have the professor's exam. We have our own exam. It's just a study guide. We made it up. And we showed it to him. We explained our strategy. And he said, oh, that's very good. He was obviously extremely relieved that he wasn't going to have to kick us out or administer other discipline for cheating. Well, when the final exam came, it was a piece of cake compared with the exam that Ken and I had memorized. Let's see, I got a 99. He got a 94. You know what the next highest grade was? An 82. An 82, and from there it went down into the 60s and 50s. When our classmates found out how well we'd done, they couldn't believe it because neither Ken nor I had reputations of being the most brilliant students, although I can't imagine why. And when we explained what we had done, their attitude shocked us. Their attitude was, oh, well, you didn't learn it. You only memorized it. Huh? See? The modern idea is that if you memorize, you haven't learned. But the medieval and ancient idea was if you haven't memorized, you haven't learned. How can you possibly use what's in your head if there's nothing in your head? And that's what memorizing does. It puts things in your head. A year passed and it was time for Old Testament exegesis. And our Old Testament exegesis prof kicked off the first day of class with a little bit of review of Hebrew. He said, now you all had Hebrew. Which of you could conjugate the verb katov in the perfect? No hands went up. Ken and I kind of made that little halfway gesture of students who don't want to appear boastful. And we could easily do it based on what we'd memorized the year before. Well, how about katov in the imperfect? Again, ours were the only hands that went up. We memorized our Hebrew exams, but we were the only ones who had facility in it the following year. Well, I want to encourage you to use your time memorizing the key ideas and associated concepts to good effect. Not only to memorize this, but to make memorizing in the way that I'm teaching you in this course a daily skill, a practical skill. If you have children, you'll find that it's a terrific way of helping students learn. My 10-year-old nephew, Kyle, he's in the 5th grade now, but last year in the 4th grade, at a new school, he was given a difficult assignment that involved giving a speech. He could use PowerPoint, he could use a number of different things, but it wasn't an easy topic. He had to research the history and background of a voluntary drama group in town. Well, he and I worked on it together and we made up a series of 3x5 cards that represented the basic outline of the talk that he was going to give. And then we used these memory techniques to memorize the content of those 3 cards. So after 2 days, I didn't actually have to hold up a card. I could just point to card number 1. He wasn't able to see it because I was quite a distance away, and he could work through everything on card number 1, and the same way card number 2, and the same way card number 3. He wound up giving a PowerPoint, and the great thing about it was his PowerPoint was entirely independent of everything that he said. So that as he clicked ahead on the PowerPoint, he never once looked at the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint simply illustrated the ideas and people and events and places and plays that he was talking about. It was considered by far the best presentation of anyone in his class. So this year, he and I have been working on many of their difficult 5th grade spelling words, and I've been drilling him in how to memorize words. And he says, Papa, you don't need to worry about that. Last year you taught me how to memorize and I use it all the time. So this can really be a big help, and I encourage you to make the most of it. So that's my 411 on the importance of memorization, and possibly I'll have another opportunity to come back to that later.